Subscribe to the channel for more thrilling mafia stories like this. The door closed behind him with a sound that felt heavier than a gunshot. It wasn't loud, but it was final. The kind of sound that told you the world you knew had just ended, and whatever came next would be decided inside this room. The office was large, elegant, and terrifying in its calm. Dark wood walls, a thick carpet that swallowed footsteps, and a wide desk positioned like a throne. Behind it sat Victor Moretti, the kind of man people whispered about instead of nomming out loud. He didn't look angry. That was the problem. Ethan Cole stood near the door, his pulse loud in his ears. He had walked into this meeting believing it was routine, just another late-night conversation about deliveries and numbers. That illusion shattered the moment Victor raised his hand, not shouting, not threatening, just gesturing toward the chair across from him. "Sit down," the Mafia boss said. The words were calm, almost polite, but they carried weight. Ethan hesitated for half a second too long. Victor's eyes lifted, sharp and focused, locking onto him. Ethan felt suddenly exposed, like every thought he had ever hidden was written across his face. He moved forward and sat, the leather chair cold beneath him. Victor leaned back slowly, folding his hands together. He was in his late 40s, silver threading through his dark hair, his suit perfectly tailored. He looked more like a successful businessman than a crime lord, which was exactly why he was so dangerous. Men like Victor didn't survive by being loud. They survived by knowing everything. "No one leaves," Victor said evenly, without telling the truth. Ethan swallowed. His mouth felt dry, his tongue heavy. He forced himself to breathe normally, reminding himself that panic was a weakness Victor would smell instantly. He had worked for the Moretti organization for 3 years. He had been careful, loyal, or at least he thought he had. Outside the office, the building was alive with quiet movement. Guards in hallways, men who didn't ask questions. Inside, it felt like time had slowed, every second stretching thin. Victor tapped a finger against the desk twice. "Tell me something, Ethan," he said. "How long have you known?" Ethan's heart skipped. Known what? The question was vague on purpose. Victor wanted to see his reaction, wanted him to reveal himself without being accused of anything specific. Ethan met his gaze and kept his face neutral. "I'm not sure what you mean," Ethan said. Victor smiled faintly, not warmth, not humor, just acknowledgement. "That answer works when you're innocent," he said. "It fails when you're not." Ethan felt sweat forming at the base of his neck. He thought of the ledger he'd seen by accident, the one that didn't match the official numbers. He thought of the shipment rerouted last month without approval. He thought of the warning text he'd ignored, assuming it was paranoia. He realized now it was a test. Victor stood and walked slowly around the desk. Each step was unhurried, confident. He stopped behind Ethan's chair, close enough that Ethan could smell his cologne. Victor placed a hand on the back of the chair, resting it there, casual but controlling. "People think power is about force," Victor said. "It's not. It's about information, knowing who's lying before they open their mouth." Ethan clenched his fists in his lap. Running wasn't an option. Fighting wasn't an option. The only thing he had left was timing, and he didn't know if he had already lost it. "I've been loyal," Ethan said quietly. "I've done everything asked of me." Victor moved back into Ethan's view and studied him. "Loyalty is action," he said, "not words." He returned to his seat and opened a drawer. Ethan's breath caught, expecting a weapon, but instead Victor pulled out a thin folder and placed it on the desk. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. The folder itself was enough. "Someone in my organization has been feeding information to people who shouldn't have it," Victor said. "Routes, times, names." He looked directly at Ethan. "That information passed through you." Ethan's mind raced. He hadn't leaked anything intentionally. He was sure of that. But he had trusted the wrong person, shared details in conversations he thought were safe. In this world, that mistake could cost more than his job. "I didn't betray you," Ethan said. His voice shook slightly despite his effort. "But I think I know who did." Victor raised an eyebrow. "Now that," he said, "is the first interesting thing you've said tonight." Ethan leaned forward, lowering his voice. There's someone higher up than me, someone who's been setting people up to take the fall. I didn't see it at first, but it's clear now. If I'm here, it means they're trying to erase me. Victor watched him carefully, searching for cracks. Names, he said simply. Ethan hesitated. Saying the name would seal his fate one way or another. If he was wrong, he was dead. If he was right, he would become useful, which was only slightly safer. Before Ethan could speak, a knock sounded at the door. Victor didn't look away from Ethan. "We're busy," he said. The door opened anyway. A guard stepped in tense. "Boss," he said, "there's been a problem at the warehouse." Victor's expression changed subtly. Not panic, calculation. He stood, adjusting his cuffs. "Looks like the night isn't finished," he said. He turned back to Ethan. "You're staying right here," he added. "When I come back, I expect the truth, all of it." The door closed again, leaving Ethan alone in the office. His reflection stared back at him from the polished desk surface, pale and uncertain. For the first time, he understood something clearly. This wasn't an interrogation. It was a countdown. Ethan sat alone in the office, the silence pressing down on him harder than Victor's stare ever had. Without the boss in the room, the space felt bigger and somehow more dangerous, like a cage with the door unlocked but guards outside every exit. He forced himself to breathe slowly, counting each inhale, each exhale, because panic would only cloud his thinking. He replayed Victor's words again and again, especially the part about information passing through him. That was true. Too true. Ethan had been a middle link, trusted enough to hear things but not powerful enough to question them, and now that position felt like a noose tightening around his neck. He stood and walked to the window, looking down at the city lights far below, each one representing a life that had nothing to do with this world, a world where meetings didn't end with threats disguised as calm conversation. He wondered if he would ever walk those streets again as a free man, or if tonight was the moment everything ended. The door opened suddenly, making him flinch. A man stepped inside quietly and closed it behind him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a scar running from his jaw to his neck. The kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. Ethan recognized him immediately. Luca Romano, Victor's right hand. If Victor was the mind of the organization, Luca was its muscle and its memory. Luca leaned against the wall, arms crossed, studying Ethan as if he were a puzzle missing a few critical pieces. He didn't speak right away, and that silence felt deliberate, a test of nerves. "You look like someone waiting for a verdict," Luca finally said. Ethan chose his words carefully. "I look like someone who doesn't know what he's being charged with." Luca gave a short, humorless smile. "In this life, charges come later. First, we decide if you're useful." He pushed off the wall and walked closer, stopping a few feet away. Up close, Luca's presence was overwhelming. He smelled of leather and smoke, and his eyes were sharp, always alert. "Victor thinks you know something," he continued. "That means two things. Either you're smart enough to see the pattern or careless enough to be part of it." "I didn't betray anyone," Ethan said. "But someone did, and they made sure the trail led to me." Luca studied his face, searching for fear, for guilt, for anything that would confirm his suspicions. "Names," he said, echoing Victor's demand. Ethan hesitated again, then shook his head. "Not yet, not without protection." Luca laughed softly. "Protection," he repeated. "You're sitting in the most dangerous building in the city asking for protection." Before Ethan could respond, Luca's phone buzzed. He checked it, his expression tightening. "Warehouse wasn't an accident," he said. "Police showed up 10 minutes before our cleanup crew. Someone tipped them off." Ethan felt a chill run through him. "That's exactly what I'm talking about," he said. "Someone's controlling the timing." Luca looked at him for a long moment, then turned toward the door. "You're coming with me," he said. "Where?" Ethan asked. "Somewhere quieter," Luca replied. "Victor wants answers, but I want context." They moved through the building quickly, down a private elevator and into the underground garage. The air was cool and smelled of oil and concrete. They got into a black sedan, and Luca drove without speaking, weaving through the city with practiced ease. Ethan watched the streets pass by, his mind racing. He realized this was his chance, maybe his only one, to shift the narrative, to stop being the suspect and become the source. They stopped at a small cafe that looked closed for the night. Luca unlocked the door and led Ethan inside. The lights were dim, the chairs stacked, but the place felt oddly safe compared to the office. Luca gestured for Ethan to sit at a table and took the chair across from him. "Talk," Luca said. Ethan leaned forward. "It's Daniel Cross," he said quietly. "He's been moving information sideways, not up, creating confusion, setting traps. Every leak leads back to someone else." Luca's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "That's a serious accusation." "I know," Ethan said, "but think about it. He has access. He controls schedules, and he's always one step removed when things go wrong." Luca was silent for a long time. Finally, he stood. "If you're lying," he said, "you won't see sunrise." "If I'm telling the truth," Ethan replied, "you'll want me alive." They returned to the building just before dawn. The city was quiet now, exhausted. Back in the office, Victor waited, standing by the window. He turned as they entered, his expression unreadable. "Well," Victor asked. Luca spoke first. He named Daniel Cross. Victor nodded slowly, as if he'd expected it. He turned to Ethan. "You understand what happens next," he said. Ethan met his gaze. "I do." Victor smiled faintly. "Good," he said, "because now you're part of the solution." Ethan felt no relief, only the heavy realization that telling the truth hadn't set him free. It had pulled him deeper into the game. The moment Victor said Ethan was part of the solution, the meaning settled in slowly and heavily, like a sentence handed down by a judge who never intended to be merciful. Being useful in Victor Morty's world didn't mean safety. It meant proximity to danger. Ethan was escorted to a smaller room adjacent to the main office, one without windows, furnished only with a table, 2 chairs, and a single light overhead. Time blurred there. Minutes felt like hours as Ethan replayed every interaction he had ever had with Daniel Cross, searching for missed signs, subtle manipulations, moments that now made unsettling sense. Daniel had always been calm, friendly, generous with information. Too generous. Ethan realized now that trust had been Daniel's sharpest weapon. When Luca returned, his face was serious, stripped of any casual edge. He sat across from Ethan and placed a phone on the table between them. "You're going to help us confirm this," he said, carefully. Ethan nodded. He didn't ask how. He already knew there would be no room for hesitation. Luca explained the plan in measured tones. Daniel was scheduled to oversee a transfer that evening, a small one on paper but important in its timing. If Daniel was the leak, he would try to redirect it or communicate with his outside contact. Ethan's role was simple and terrifying at the same time. He would act normal. He would speak to Daniel, feed him a controlled piece of information, and see where it traveled. If the police showed up again, the truth would be undeniable. By the time Ethan left the building, the sun was rising, painting the city in soft gold that felt undeserved. He went home, showered, changed clothes, and stared at his reflection. He looked the same, but something inside him had shifted. He wasn't just trying to survive anymore. He was stepping into a game where every move mattered, and mistakes didn't come with second chances. That afternoon, Ethan met Daniel at a downtown office they used for administrative work. Daniel greeted him with his usual relaxed smile, offering coffee and easy conversation. Watching him now felt surreal, like watching an actor perform a role Ethan finally understood. Ethan forced himself to relax, to mirror Daniel's energy, to sound casual as he mentioned the adjusted timing of the transfer, slipping the false detail into the conversation like it meant nothing at all. Daniel nodded, thoughtful, and changed the subject almost immediately. That was the first sign. He didn't question it. He didn't confirm it. He stored it. Hours later, Ethan sat in his car across the street from the warehouse, heart pounding as he watched the entrance. Luca had warned him not to interfere, not to react, just observe. The night air was cool, the street quiet. Then, just before the scheduled time, headlights appeared at the far end of the block. Too early, too precise. Ethan's stomach dropped. Police vehicles rolled in smoothly, professionally, blocking off the street. No chaos, No confusion. This wasn't a coincidence. Ethan's phone buzzed immediately. A single message from Luca appeared. "We see it too. Stay where you are." Ethan felt a strange mix of fear and vindication. He had been right, but being right didn't feel like a victory. It felt like standing at the edge of something irreversible. The aftermath moved fast. By morning, Daniel Cross was gone, not arrested, not confronted, just removed from the organization as if he had never existed. Victor didn't believe in public scenes. He believed in quiet endings. Ethan wasn't told what happened, and he didn't ask. Some questions came with answers you couldn't unhear. Instead, Victor called Ethan back to the office. This time, the atmosphere was different. Still dangerous, still controlled, but less hostile. Victor gestured for him to sit, and Ethan did so without hesitation. "You did well," Victor said. "You paid attention when others didn't." Ethan nodded. "I didn't do it to impress anyone." Victor smiled faintly. "Good," he said. "Impressing people is how you get killed." Victor leaned forward. "Daniel wasn't working alone," he continued. "He was a channel. The leak goes deeper." Ethan felt his chest tighten. "You think there are more?" "I know there are," Victor said calmly. "And now so do you." The realization hit Ethan hard. Exposing Daniel hadn't closed the case. It had opened it. Victor wasn't done with him. He was just getting started. Ethan had proven himself observant, adaptable, and desperate enough to be useful. Those were valuable traits in a long war against invisible enemies. "You have a choice," Victor said. "You can walk away from this room alive and disappear. Or you can stay, learn how this world really works, and help me clean it." Ethan understood the truth behind the offer. Walking away would never truly mean freedom. He knew too much now. Leaving would make him a liability, not a civilian. Staying was dangerous, but it was honest. "I'll stay," Ethan said. Victor nodded, satisfied. "Then listen carefully," he said. "From this moment on, trust is earned daily, including mine." As Ethan left the office, escorted but not restrained, he felt the weight of his decision settle in. He was no longer just trying to survive a single night. He was stepping into a deeper role, one where truth was currency and silence was armor. Somewhere in the city, enemies were watching, waiting, adjusting their plans. And now, whether he liked it or not, Ethan was part of Victor Morty's inner circle, standing closer than ever to both power and ruin. The days that followed felt unreal to Ethan, as if he had stepped into a parallel version of his life, where everything looked familiar but carried a sharper edge. Victor kept him close, not visibly, not in a way that drew attention, but in subtle ways that mattered more. Meetings Ethan once would not have been invited to now included him as a silent observer. Conversations stopped when he entered, then resumed with guarded language, as if everyone was recalibrating around his presence. He understood what that meant. Word had spread. He was no longer just another employee. He was the man who had pointed at Daniel Cross and survived. In Victor Morty's world, survival was a statement. Luca became his shadow, not in an obvious, threatening way, but always nearby, always aware. They spent long hours together, reviewing reports, patterns, fragments of information that, on their own, meant nothing. Together, they formed a map of betrayal that was slowly revealing itself. Ethan learned quickly that Victor's organization wasn't being attacked from one direction. It was being tested from many small pressures applied at different points, probing for weakness. Daniel had been one finger on that hand. There were others. One evening, Luca drove them out of the city to a quiet industrial zone where warehouses sat like sleeping giants. He parked the car and turned to Ethan. "You need to understand something," he said. Victor doesn't keep people close because he likes them. He keeps them close because they're useful and because he wants to see them clearly. "I know," Ethan replied. Luca studied him. "Good, because the next part isn't a test, it's exposure." Inside one of the warehouses, Victor waited with two other men Ethan didn't recognize. The air smelled of dust and oil, and the place felt deliberately chosen for its isolation. Victor didn't waste time. He explained that one of their financial coordinators had been skimming small amounts from multiple accounts, amounts too insignificant to trigger alarms individually but substantial when combined. The coordinator insisted he was clean. Victor didn't believe him, but belief wasn't enough. He wanted proof, and he wanted to know who the money was going to. Ethan listened as Victor outlined the plan. It was simple in theory and dangerous in execution. Ethan would be introduced as someone Victor trusted implicitly, someone who could be approached without fear. The coordinator would be allowed to think he had found an opportunity, a way to move money with Ethan's help. If he took it, the truth would surface. "You're putting me in front of a man you already suspect," Ethan said carefully. Victor nodded, and watching what he does. Ethan understood the real risk. If the coordinator was working with someone outside, Ethan's involvement would mark him as a target. But there was no room to argue. Saying no would undo everything he had earned. The meeting with the coordinator took place 2 days later in a private office downtown. The man, older and nervous, smiled too much and spoke too carefully. Ethan mirrored him, playing the role Victor had assigned with unsettling ease. He spoke about opportunities, about ways to streamline transfers, about trust. He hated how natural it felt. Somewhere along the conversation, the coordinator's guard slipped. He suggested a workaround, a small adjustment, nothing illegal on the surface. Ethan nodded, encouraged him, and took note of every detail. That night, Luca confirmed it. The coordinator had moved money exactly as suggested, funneling it through an account that had no legitimate connection to the business. Victor had his proof. The consequences were swift and silent. The coordinator disappeared from the organization without explanation. His name was removed from records, his office emptied. It was as if he had never been there. Ethan didn't ask what happened to him. He didn't need to. What surprised Ethan most was Victor's reaction afterward. There was no praise, no satisfaction, just a quiet acceptance that this was how things were. "This doesn't end," Victor told him during a late-night meeting. "It just changes shape." Ethan began to feel the strain. Sleep came in short bursts. Every unfamiliar car made him alert. Every phone vibration sent his heart racing. He realized that being inside Victor's circle meant living with constant awareness, never fully relaxing, never turning your back on uncertainty. Power came with vigilance, not comfort. One night, as Ethan left the building, he noticed someone watching him from across the street. The man turned away quickly, blending into the crowd, but not before Ethan caught the look in his eyes. Recognition. Not personal, but professional. Someone had taken note of him. He reported it to Luca immediately. Luca didn't dismiss it. "They're paying attention now," he said. "That was always going to happen." "Who are they?" Ethan asked. Luca's expression hardened. "People who don't like Victor staying in control." The next morning, Victor called Ethan in early. He stood by the window, hands behind his back. "Pressure creates clarity," he said without turning. "You're feeling it now." Ethan nodded. "Someone's watching me." Victor turned, smiling faintly. "Good," he said. "That means they see you as part of the structure." "That's not reassuring," Ethan replied. Victor chuckled softly. "It shouldn't be." Victor then revealed the truth Ethan had been circling. The leaks, the betrayals, the quiet attacks weren't random. They were coordinated by a rival group that had been dormant for years, waiting for the right moment to move. Daniel Cross had been their entry point, but not their leader. "And now," Victor said, "they're adjusting, which means we must as well." He placed a folder on the desk and slid it toward Ethan. "Your role is expanding," he said. "You'll be visible, trusted, and watched." Ethan opened the folder, scanning the contents. Names, locations, schedules, a roadmap into deeper territory. "This puts a target on me," Ethan said. Victor met his gaze. "You already have one." As Ethan left the office, the weight of that truth settled in. He had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. He wasn't just surviving inside the organization anymore. He was shaping its response to an unseen enemy. Somewhere beyond the city lights, people were planning their next move. And now they were planning it with Ethan Cole in mind. The folder Victor had given Ethan followed him everywhere, even when it wasn't physically in his hands. The names and locations burned into his thoughts, forming connections he couldn't unsee. Every entry represented a person with access, influence, or motive. Some were distant figures, others unsettlingly familiar. This wasn't just about stopping leaks anymore. It was about dismantling a network that had quietly embedded itself into Victor's world. Ethan understood now why Victor had chosen him. He stood at the intersection of trust and suspicion, visible enough to draw attention, but knew enough that no one knew his limits. Victor's instructions were precise. Ethan would attend meetings, social gatherings, and negotiations that previously would have been above his position. He would listen more than he spoke, observe more than he acted. Most importantly, he would allow himself to be seen. If the rival group was watching, Victor wanted them to believe Ethan was becoming indispensable. That illusion would draw them closer. The first test came sooner than expected. A private charity event downtown brought together business leaders, politicians, and people who lived carefully crafted double lives. Ethan arrived in a tailored suit, feeling exposed despite the elegance of the setting. Music played softly, glasses clinked, and polite smiles hid calculations behind them. He moved through the crowd slowly, nodding glances that lingered a second too long, conversations that paused when he approached. Then he saw her. Sophia Vale stood near the balcony, speaking with a small group. She was poised, confident, her laughter effortless. Ethan recognized her name from the folder. She ran a logistics firm that had legitimate contracts with Victor's businesses. On paper, she was clean. In reality, she sat dangerously close to several compromised roots. Their eyes met briefly, and something passed between them. Curiosity, perhaps, or recognition. They spoke later, away from the crowd. Sophia was sharp, asking questions without sounding like she was asking them. Ethan matched her, careful not to reveal more than he intended. Their conversation felt like a dance, each step measured. When they parted, Ethan felt certain of one thing. Sophia was important. Whether she was an ally or an enemy remained unclear. Over the next few weeks, pressure mounted. Minor disruptions occurred across the organization. Delayed shipments, misdirected paperwork, nothing catastrophic but enough to signal intent. The rival group was probing again, testing responses. Ethan became the common thread in several conversations, his name mentioned casually, his role exaggerated. That was intentional. Victor wanted the enemy focused on him. One night, Ethan received a message from an unknown number. No threats, no demands, just coordinates and a time. He showed it to Luca immediately. Luca's jaw tightened. "They're reaching out," he said, carefully. Victor's response was swift. Ethan would go, not alone, but not visibly protected either. The meeting place was a quiet parking structure on the edge of the city, empty except for a single car parked under a flickering light. Ethan arrived early, heart pounding, senses alert. A man stepped out of the shadows moments later. He was unremarkable in appearance, the kind of person you wouldn't remember if you passed him on the street. That was intentional, too. "You're becoming influential," the man said calmly. "People notice." Ethan didn't respond immediately. Silence was safer. "We don't want conflict," the man continued. "We want balance. Victor doesn't understand balance." Ethan met his gaze. "Victor understands power," he said, "and power doesn't like being challenged quietly." The man smiled. "That's why we're talking to you." The implication was clear. They saw Ethan as a potential fracture point. Someone new, someone ambitious, someone who might be convinced that Victor's world wasn't the only option. "I'm not interested," Ethan said. "You will be," the man replied. "Everyone is eventually." He left without another word. Back at the office, Victor listened to Ethan's account without interruption. When Ethan finished, Victor nodded slowly. "They're impatient," he said. "That's good." "How?" Ethan asked. "Impatience leads to mistakes," Victor replied, "and mistakes reveal leadership." Victor then gave Ethan his most dangerous assignment yet. He wanted Ethan to accept further contact, to listen, to appear uncertain. Not enough to betray anything, but enough to encourage confidence. Ethan felt the weight of it immediately. Playing a role in front of enemies was one thing. Playing a role in front of Victor while doing it was another. As weeks passed, the line blurred. Ethan found himself engaging in conversations that edged closer to betrayal, speaking in hypotheticals, allowing doubt to surface just enough to be believable. The rival group's representative returned, bringing another person this time. A woman with sharp eyes and a controlled voice. She spoke of restructuring, of shared control, of a future where Victor's dominance ended quietly. Ethan listened, nodded, asked careful questions. Each word felt like walking on glass. Meanwhile, his personal life dissolved. Friends drifted away. Calls went unanswered. His apartment felt temporary, like a place he was borrowing rather than living in. Sleep became rare and shallow. He began to wonder who he would be if this ended, and whether that version of himself still existed. Sophia Vale reappeared unexpectedly one evening, inviting him to dinner under the pretense of business. The conversation quickly shifted to more personal ground. She spoke of ambition, of limits, of the danger of serving someone else's vision forever. Ethan realized she was testing him too. "You're standing very close to the fire," she said softly. "Eventually, you decide whether to control it or get burned." That night, Ethan reported everything to Victor, every word, every implication. Victor listened, expression unreadable. "They're closing in," Victor said, "which means we're close as well." Ethan nodded, though exhaustion tugged at him. "How much longer?" Victor met his eyes, "Until they make their move." As Ethan left the office, he felt the tension tightening like a wire drawn too far. The rival group believed they were recruiting him. Victor believed he was bait. And somewhere in between, Ethan wondered how much of himself would be left when the trap finally closed. The tension finally broke on a night that felt too quiet to be real. No warnings, no sudden disruptions, just an uneasy stillness that settled over the city like it was holding its breath. Ethan felt it before anything happened, a sense that the waiting was over and whatever had been building in the dark was ready to surface. His phone rang just after midnight. It was Luca. His voice was calm, but tight. "It's happening," Luca said. "Now." Ethan dressed without thinking. Muscle memory taking over, and was in the car within minutes. The streets were nearly empty as Luca drove, the city lights blurring past like distant stars. No one spoke. They didn't need to. Everything had already been decided long before this drive began. They arrived at a private property outside the city, an old estate Victor had quietly acquired years earlier. It looked peaceful from the outside, almost serene, but Ethan knew better. Inside, Victor's people were already in position, invisible but ready. Victor stood in the center of the main room, composed as ever, as if this were just another late meeting instead of the endgame. "They made their move," Victor said as Ethan approached. "They believe tonight is the night you choose them." Ethan nodded. He felt strangely calm now, as if fear had burned itself out and left clarity behind. "They're confident," he said. "They think I'm divided." Victor smiled faintly. "Good, confidence dulls instincts." The plan unfolded with ruthless precision. The rival group's leadership had agreed to meet Ethan at the estate, believing it neutral ground, believing they were about to secure an insider who would destabilize Victor from within. They arrived in stages, careful but unaware that every step was already mapped. Sophia Vale was among them. That detail hit Ethan harder than he expected. He wondered briefly if she had ever truly believed in what she was saying or if ambition had always been her compass. The meeting began calmly. Drinks were poured, polite words exchanged. The woman with the sharp eyes spoke first, outlining their vision one last time. Shared control, new structure, Victor reduced to a figurehead. She spoke as if the future were already written. "And you," she said to Ethan, "stand at the center of that future." Ethan took a breath. He felt every pair of eyes on him. This was the moment the entire operation balanced on. He thought of the night Victor first told him to sit down, of the fear, the uncertainty, the choice he hadn't known he was making. Now he knew exactly who he was. "I already chose," Ethan said quietly. The room shifted instantly. Hands moved. Expressions hardened. And then Victor stepped forward out of the shadows, his presence filling the space like a sudden change in pressure. "You chose correctly," Victor said. The illusion shattered. Doors closed. Guards emerged, weapons drawn but steady. The rival leaders realized too late that the trap had been built around their certainty. Panic flickered in their eyes, quickly replaced by resignation. They had underestimated Victor's patience and Ethan's loyalty. Sophia looked at Ethan, something like regret crossing her face. "You were never on the fence," she said. "No," Ethan replied. "I was paying attention." What followed was swift and controlled. No chaos, no unnecessary violence. Victor didn't need spectacle, he needed resolution. Deals were stripped away, leverage revealed. The rival group's network collapsed inward as Victor exposed their connections, their safe routes, their financial lifelines. By dawn, it was over. Not erased, but broken beyond immediate repair. As the sun rose, Victor dismissed everyone except Ethan and Luca. The estate felt empty now, like a stage after the final act. "You did exactly what I needed," Victor said to Ethan. "You told the truth when it mattered." Ethan exhaled slowly, the weight he'd been carrying finally easing. "What happens now?" Victor studied him for a long moment. "Now," he said, "you decide what kind of man you become with the knowledge you have." Luca clapped Ethan on the shoulder once, firm and approving, then left them alone. Victor poured 2 glasses and handed one to Ethan. "You came in here afraid," he said. "You stayed because you understood something most people never do. Truth isn't freedom, it's responsibility." Ethan took the glass but didn't drink. He looked around the room, then back at Victor. "I don't want to be what Daniel was," he said, "or what they were." Victor nodded. "Then don't be." Silence stretched between them, but this time it wasn't threatening. It was reflective. "You're free to leave," Victor said finally. "Or you can stay, not as bait, not as a test, as someone who understands the cost." Ethan thought of the version of himself who had walked into this world thinking it was temporary. He thought of the city below, of the truths he now carried. "I'll stay," he said, "but on my terms." Victor smiled, genuine this time. That's how it should be. As Ethan walked out into the morning light, the city looked different. Not safer, not kinder, but clearer. He knew now that the night Victor told him to sit down had never been about leaving the room. It had been about deciding who he would be once the truth was told. The weeks after that night moved at a slower pace, but the tension never fully disappeared. It changed form, settling into something quieter and more deliberate. Ethan noticed it in the way meetings were conducted, shorter and more precise, and in how Victor spoke less but expected more. The organization had survived a serious fracture, and now it was rebuilding itself with intention. Old systems were replaced, access tightened, and trust reevaluated. Ethan was no longer treated as a temporary solution or an experiment. He had become a fixed point in Victor's inner structure, someone whose presence shaped decisions even when he wasn't speaking. That realization carried weight, because influence, once earned, could never truly be set aside. Victor kept his promise about terms. Ethan was given authority, but also boundaries. He was allowed to question processes, to suggest changes, to challenge assumptions, something few people ever did in Victor's world without consequences. The difference was that Ethan didn't challenge out of ego or ambition. He challenged out of understanding. He had seen how small cracks turned into disasters, how silence protected the wrong people, and how loyalty without awareness became a liability. Victor respected that, even if he never said it out loud. Luca remained a constant presence, though their dynamic shifted. Where Luca had once observed Ethan carefully, now he trusted him openly. They worked side by side, restructuring operations, building redundancies that made infiltration harder and betrayal easier to detect. Ethan learned the deeper mechanics of power, not just how it was enforced, but how it was maintained. He realized that Victor's greatest strength was not fear, but patience. Victor didn't rush outcomes. He shaped them. Despite the stability, Ethan couldn't escape the consequences of what he knew. Faces from the past surfaced in unexpected moments. Daniel Cross, Sophia Vale, people who had made choices believing they were in control, only to discover too late that control was an illusion. Ethan often wondered whether things could have ended differently for them, whether one honest conversation at the right time might have changed everything. But in this world, timing was unforgiving, and hesitation was rarely rewarded. One evening, Victor invited Ethan to his office again, the same room where everything had begun. The memory of that first night returned vividly, the command to sit down, the certainty that he wasn't leaving without the truth. Now, the room felt different, still dangerous but familiar. "You've changed things," Victor said, standing by the window. "Not just outcomes, direction." Ethan considered that. "I didn't plan to," he said. "I just didn't want to lie." Victor turned, studying him. "That's rarer than loyalty," he said. "Loyalty can be bought, truth cannot." Victor then spoke of the future, not in grand terms, but in careful ones. He intended to reduce exposure, to legitimize more fronts, to make the organization harder to attack by making it less predictable. It wasn't redemption, and Victor didn't pretend it was. It was survival through evolution. "You'll be part of that," Victor said, "if you want to be." Ethan nodded. "I do." Later that night, Ethan walked alone through the city. For the first time in months, he felt something close to calm. The fear that had once driven him had transformed into awareness. He understood the rules now, not just of Victor's world, but of himself. He knew how far he was willing to go and where he would stop. That clarity mattered more than safety. Time passed, and with it came a new normal. The rival group never fully disappeared, but their influence faded. Attempts to regroup were quietly intercepted and neutralized before they could grow. The organization stabilized, not because it was feared more, but because it was watched more carefully from within. Ethan became a gatekeeper of sorts, someone people thought twice about manipulating. His reputation wasn't built on violence or intimidation, but on the understanding that he noticed things, and that he reported what he noticed without hesitation. One afternoon, a young associate was brought into the office, nervous and unsure, much like Ethan had been once. Victor watched silently as the man fumbled through explanations, excuses tumbling over each other. Finally, Victor raised a hand and gestured to a chair. "Sit down," Victor said calmly. Ethan felt the echo of those words ripple through him. He watched the associate sit, fear written plainly on his face, and understood the power of that moment. Not the threat behind it, but the opportunity. A chance to tell the truth before it was too late. Victor glanced at Ethan briefly, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Ethan realized then that his role wasn't just about protecting Victor's empire. It was about shaping how truth was handled within it. Months later, as the city lights flickered on at dusk, Ethan stood by the same window Victor often favored. He thought about how one sentence had changed his life, how being forced to sit down had stopped him from running and pushed him to face what he knew. He hadn't left that room as the same man. He had left with responsibility, with awareness, with a truth that refused to stay quiet. In this world, people believed survival came from strength, from secrecy, from force. Ethan had learned something different. Survival came from attention, from seeing the moment when silence became dangerous and choosing to speak before it was too late. And as long as he remembered that, he knew one thing for certain. When the truth was demanded, he would never look away again.